American International presents Crime and Passion, starring Omar Sharif. He gambled with other men's money and other men's wives. Now, he was gambling with his life. Karen Black, a woman with an insatiable hunger for fine food and young men. Joseph Bottoms, an expert at handling fast slopes and rich women. Crime and Passion. Rated R.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
They're going to kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the American International Podcast, where we watch and review movies from American International Pictures. Some good, some not so good.
And then there's this week.
And then there's this week where we're taking a look at Crime and Passion from 1976. I'm Jeff Markin.
I'm Cheryl Lightfoot. I thought you were going to say Crime and Punishment. Not to spoil anything, but this movie kind of was punishment. Crime and Passion was directed by Ivan Passer, written by Alan R. Trustman, David M. Wolfe, and Ivan Passer. It's based upon the novel An Ace Up My Sleeve by James Hadley Chase, and it was produced by Barney Bernhard and Robert L. Abrams for Gloria Films, and it was released by American International Pictures.
Crime and Passion stars Omar Sharif as André Ferren, Karen Black as Susan Winters, Joseph Bottoms as Larry, Bernhard Wicki as Hermann Rolf, Heinz Ehrenfreund as Henkel.
It also stars Elma Karlowa as the Masseuse, Volker Prechtel as Gastwirt, Erich Padalewski as Autoverkäufer, the movie's producer Robert L. Abrams as Mr. Blatt, Franz Muxneder as Priester, I think that's the priest, and Margaret Soper as Sylvia.
Before we get into it, I feel we should mention that there are several different versions of Crime and Passion, and it's not an easy movie to find.
No, it isn't. Not intact, anyway.
It is available on YouTube with the title of Frankenstein's Spookschloss. Does that sound right?
Spookschloss Castle.
And we ourselves tracked down a VHS copy of the AIP cut of Crime and Passion. So that is what we are going to be reviewing today. The AIP version opens with the AI logo in the clouds and an animated credits sequence with a head spinning around. It's kind of Dali-esque in appearance.
Yeah, it's kind of Freudian too, with a lot of dream symbolism. Maybe it's Jungian, a lot of dream imagery symbolism. And there's it looks like a phrenology head model spinning around, going through various scenes. The other cut that we saw, the open, it's just a still of the Frankenstein's castle. That's the setting for part of the movie with some credits over it. So the AIP version is much more interesting.
And also the music is different for both versions, but we'll be getting into that more later.
Right.
So the film for both versions opens with a bright yellow car speeding through the city of wherever we are,
Yeah.
somewhere in Europe.
It's some Teutonic city set in the Alps. The car races through busy city streets. It's menacing all the Volks and all the wagons in its way.
When the car pulls to a stop, Omar Sharif as André Ferren steps out, along with a car salesman. Turns out that André has just bought this car 3 months ago, and he's looking to sell it back.
André is demanding a higher price than the seller is willing to pay. But André is a sharp businessman, I guess we're supposed to believe, and eventually gets the price he's asking for. It's 300,000 shillings.
50 shillings of which he intends to get in cash. André has never heard of car depreciation, and it works in his favor.
Well, 3 months shouldn't be that much depreciation, but he's obviously strong-arming this car salesman who gives in. Now André's feeling good. He's walking to work. He goes through the back of a limousine or some driver car. He kisses the lady sitting in the back seat and then passes through. He walks up to his office, and we can tell he's a ladies' man here. He's confronted by one of his conquests, who he tries to avoid. She looks very hurt.
Yeah, the elevator doors open while he's on there, and she's there, and she goes, André. And he looks a little alarmed and closes the doors.
And then he goes up to his own office where he sees a new receptionist, someone new at the office, and he's obviously very interested in her. However, there's another woman who commands his attention, and that's his assistant, Susan, who's played by Karen Black.
We learned that this is a business of investment managers.
Yes, and since I don't understand that industry very well, I'm just going to be explaining it as best I can. Susan is ordered to buy 1,000 shares of Dynabridge, which she arranges. André gives Susan the proceeds from the sale of the car, then goes into his office. We can note right now, I think it's not going to surprise anybody, that as a businessman, André is hella shady. Susan gets a phone call from someone named Hermann Rolf. He wants to talk to André, but Susan says André's unavailable and talks to him herself.
She goes into his office and finds André has fallen asleep while listening to motivational tapes. He awakens when she enters, and she tells him that Hermann Rolf is angry because he's lost $600 million and he's threatening to pull all of his accounts. And André was the one who was handling his accounts.
You'd think this would make André upset. However, it has a very different effect on André. It makes him horny.
Yep, he reacts hornily to bad news.
And since Susan is the object of his very aggressive affections, she tries to stop telling him bad news because she knows what it does to him, which is make him sexually aroused. However, she does manage to get the whole spiel out. And one thing she tells André that actually slows him down a bit is that Hermann Rolf asked her out.
But she turned him down. And André kind of chastises her for this because Hermann Rolf is not a person you want to turn down.
No, and
not turn down, but it's not a person you want to give a negative answer to.
Yes, don't say no to Hermann. However, it is okay to lose all his money. But actually, André is cooking up a scheme.
But there's more important things to do at the moment, so into the conference room they go.
Yes, it's time for sex on the conference table. But we get to see that there's a camera trained on the conference room. Who's watching the feed from that camera? Oddly enough, it's someone who doesn't work for the company.
No, it's someone who appears to be watching from their home. And he seems to be well-to-do because there's a man there serving him drinks.
Yeah, a manservant. So in rather short order, Susan does agree to go on a date with Hermann. We see her getting into the back of his car and driving away. However, the next scene is of Susan and André going out to eat. Well, Susan's eating anyways.
Yes, they're meeting so that Susan can give André the latest 411 on her rendezvous with Rolf.
I don't think they have 411 in Europe.
And the big topic of conversation for this encounter is that Rolf wants her to put on a few pounds.
Well, Rolf is interested in her. He even proposed to her.
But he thinks she's a little skinny for his taste.
She's a little on the skinny side. The next few scenes are of Karen Black shoving as much pastry into her face as she possibly can. She doesn't actually fatten up, though.
She does say that she's hesitant to fatten up because she's worried that André will no longer find her attractive.
André puts those fears at rest, though, and helps her shovel food in her mouth. It's very gross. She also tells André that she offered to be Hermann's confidant, and she claimed that André has only his best interests at heart. So this is the crux of the scheme here. André is going to use Susan to get to Hermann, Rolf, and keep any negative, pressure coming from Hermann, and also have access to all his money.
So the plan is that she will accept the proposal, go ahead and get married, and then file for divorce after a few months.
Right. But in the meantime, André has access to his funds and all his business. So eventually she, is sufficiently fattened up to marry Hermann.
Yep, it's the wedding day, and André is giving away the bride.
I think that's not even metaphorical at this point. The ceremony is performed entirely in German, which apparently Susan understands, but I don't. Not most of it anyways. And we can see here that Hermann is a very imposing figure. This is kind of the first time we see him in full. He's very tall, very stern looking, and for some reason wearing black rubber gloves throughout the ceremony.
And you may recognize him as the well-to-do man who was watching André and Susan have sex on the monitor.
Yeah, so the question of why he's marrying her gets even more suspicious. Before the ceremony ends, Rolf's manservant walks out of the chapel. He looks up the hill where the Frankenstein's Spukschloss, the castle, is. He signals them, and someone there fires a cannon. Now the wedding's over.
So after the ceremony, the newlywed couple rides through town.
It's a very beautiful scene. It's snowing. It's very wintry. They're in coaches. They're all decorated up in their Christmas finery. It looks very much like a Hallmark movie.
And the cannon is shot off again.
However, Hermann looks very grim as he and Susan ride to their reception.
At the reception, André is looking around for Susan, but he can't find her. He looks inside an Iron Maiden, but it's empty. He does finally find her alone in another room.
And she's very upset. She's sad because now she's married and she's not going to be able to see André for a while. André says it won't be that long. In 6 months, he'll create a scandal and then she can get a divorce.
They're about to kiss when Rolf appears in the doorway. He says the cake has arrived and he would like Susan to come and cut the cake with him. As she leaves, André tells Rolf thank you for keeping him on his accounts. And Rolf turns to leave, and as he does, he says it makes Susan happy.
Later we see that André has already moved on to a new girlfriend. I think it's probably that receptionist that he noticed earlier. And he's still avoiding the one woman who he apparently disappointed earlier. He's called into a board meeting. He says he's late because his mother died. And someone in the room says, again?
The mood of this meeting changes rather quickly, though, because it appears that André may have embezzled $2.5 million from Hermann Rolf's accounts.
It's more of an ambush than a meeting. André's face seems to drop as he starts off getting praised. And then the auditor, who works for Hermann, lowers the boom on him.
If it wasn't for this unscheduled audit, this error may not have been noticed for quite some time. And we also see that this is the boardroom where André and Susan hooked up earlier. So there's a camera in there.
So we know who's watching.
And Rolf is watching.
The auditor gives André a choice, either pay back the money now or the company can pay it back, which would mean the end of André's career. André looks panicked. He tries to make excuses. Yeah, he signed that paper, but he's always signing papers. And while he's doing all this, he's making his way towards the door and he escapes. The auditor says that André may be forced to resign from the company. And the next time we see André, he's driving somewhere. It's very wintry, wherever he's going. And the next time we see André, he's in his car, driving somewhere very snowy.
And it's also snowy where Susan is skiing. She appears to be skiing with Larry, who I guess may be her ski instructor.
Yeah, he's her ski instructor. I have him down as a gum-chewing yokel.
Well, he's an American.
Right, he's an American. We'll get more of him later. However, we now find out that this is André's destination as well.
André's returning to the inn where the wedding reception had been held.
When André arrives, he goes to the front desk and asks for Susan. They point him in a direction. He opens a random door. There's a maid making up a bed. As André has been walking through the inn saying that he's finished, thus making him very horny, he decides that this is a perfect time to accost this maid, push her down on the bed, and lay on top of her.
Susan and Larry continue skiing and then return to the cabin. André finds out where she's staying and pays Susan a visit.
He comes via the outside entrance through the snow and sees Susan on the deck eating some yogurt. She's always eating. And she's not too happy to see him.
She's unhappy to see him, and she's a little miffed at him because she's now finding herself trapped in a loveless marriage.
And it hasn't been 6 months, it's been 10 months.
Yeah, this plan was supposed to have been over by now.
And it doesn't seem to have any end in sight. And then André tells her what he's really there for. And that's getting help with the $2.5 million that going to mean the end of his career, if not his life. Susan says that she can't help him and she doesn't want to. But then she gives in to, I guess, André's charms and they hug.
And then they go skiing.
Right. I guess there's nothing else to do.
So André is not very good at skiing.
He falls over. Then Larry, the ski instructor, leaps off a ramp over them, and he and Susan shush off.
So this leaves André alone to attempt skiing. He takes a tumble, and then he laughs to himself at his misfortune.
But there's somebody else on the slope.
Yeah, another skier is heading toward him, and he's holding a ski pole over his head in a threatening manner.
And it's not just any ski pole, it's a sharpened ski pole.
André dodges at the last second, and the skier somehow manages to impale himself on this pole instead of his prey.
Yeah, and he's dead.
So Susan is relaxing in the pool with Larry, and André runs in to tell him that he was almost killed.
Susan's very blasé about the attempted murder. And André storms off in a huff.
Well, she doesn't believe him. And now we're at a casino. André is still trying to convince Susan that he was nearly killed, and she tells him that Hermann has called her and knows André is there, and that they won't be seeing each other again.
She also knows that André started sleeping around on her the second day after she got married. André begs her to get Rolf to back down and to say that she's the reason that he sold those shares, or to loan her the money to pay him back.
Yeah, he still needs that $2.5 million, so she asks him for his lucky number, and it's 17.
And they're at the roulette wheel. She takes 5 enormous gold chips, lays him down on 17, and promptly loses. André is aghast at how much money she just threw away.
He's aghast, but he's watching the wheel because he knows if it comes his way, then his problems are solved. So he doesn't even notice when she leaves the room because he's too busy watching the wheel spin around.
There's no guarantee she would give him that money. Eventually, André does notice that Susan has left, finds her, and talks about divorce again. But Susan tells André she can't divorce Hermann. He has all his ex-wives killed.
So now we cut to a disco where André is meeting Larry. André orders a scotch for himself and a milk for Larry.
Well, that's what he asked for. And André had to make sure that that's what he really wanted.
Yeah, André finds us both amusing and confusing.
He's quizzing Larry about his relationship with Susan. Larry doesn't seem to have one, so André counsels him on how to get Susan into bed.
So next we see Susan and Larry eating lunch, or rather, Susan feeding Larry lunch.
They have their little 9.5 weeks moment. It's pretty gross, honestly. Andre's outside and he tosses a snowball at their window to get their attention. So they turn and look, just in time to see him almost get run over by a car. And then André runs away. This makes Susan rather emotional for some reason.
And now Susan and Larry are in a car, and Larry asks her what kind of animal she is.
They make some inane small talk.
And well, besides ordering milk, we kind of get the first impression that Larry might be a little bit juvenile.
Yes, he's like a child in a man's body. It does seem that André, who's also driving, is following them, but the movie doesn't make that super clear. What is clear, though, is that there is a truck headed straight for him.
André swerves and somehow embeds his car in a snowbank.
Without any tire tracks behind it.
In the middle of a snowbank. It's not like he's on the ground and hit the ground. He
sailed into
it. He went airborne into a snowbank.
We didn't get to see that part, though. That might have given this movie a little more of a cool factor. He stumbles up a well-trodden snowbank towards the inn.
So Larry and Susan have arrived at their destination. It's a castle.
It's Frankenstein's castle.
And Larry says it looks like Frankenstein's castle, and also that it looks haunted.
Susan says, yes, it is haunted. There's a headless knight, and if Larry sees it, he'll die. And there's a ghost in the tower, and blah, blah, blah.
Larry's really excited by this.
Yes.
He wants to check out the tower.
So as soon as they walk in the door, he's running up the stairs trying to find the ghost.
Susan tells him to be sure to take a penny for the toll, and he says he's not worried about anything happening to him because he's an American.
Ghosts don't like American, it is known. He finally does get to the top of the stairs, where he sees a suit of armor, not headless, unfortunately, standing in a alcove.
He starts to converse with it. It doesn't respond, which is probably a good thing.
He promises to return at midnight, but he asks the ghost for a sign that he's really there. At that, a pigeon flies out of the helmet of the suit of armor and sits on top of it. And Larry takes that as his sign.
So André is trudging back up to the inn. He goes in and gets a room for himself. The desk clerk is a man that we saw at the wedding reception. He's noticeably tall with a very crooked nose, so he's very recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
And the innkeeper calls Sylvia to take André to a bath.
Sylvia, the maid, is a very toothsome wench, and André looks very interested in her. As she draws the bath, he strips off. This isn't anywhere near his room. This is just, a couple of baths out for everyone's use.
And Sylvia asks him if he wants a massage, and he says, sure. And then she laughs and leaves.
We see that the innkeeper is calling somebody. He was very interested when André checked in, and he's obviously reporting to someone. André gets into the bath and starts singing, "She'll be coming around the mountain when she comes."
As he's washing his feet, when there's suddenly a knock on the door, he says, come in, and a heavyset woman enters. It's the masseuse.
Yes, she's less toothsome than the earlier wench. She's also busting out of a silk robe. She's not dressed.
She picks him up and carries his naked body down the hall to the massage table.
Yeah, she scoops him out like he's a toddler and sort of clucks and coos at him like he's a baby. This is very strange.
And then she sets to work.
We see Rolf taking a call in his car, so this is obviously from the innkeeper.
Back at the massage table, the massage has started to turn violent because instead of a massage, the masseuse is now strangling André.
However, he was so fixated on her breast, which escaped from her robe, that he didn't notice at first. But as the nipple dangles ever closer to his face, André decides to bite to get away from her strangling hands. But she just laughs at him after he runs away.
He goes back to the bath and grabs his clothes and then runs outside as he's getting dressed.
And we see now that he's downhill from the castle where Larry and Susan are.
Now back up at the castle, Larry is seated at the head of a table and Susan is strutting around wearing sunglasses indoors.
It's so strange.
She picks up some sort of fruit, a persimmon or something.
Something with a rind and a very juicy fruit inside.
She takes a bite and sucks the juice because she's got this food thing. It's really gross.
She's obviously trying to seduce him. She's blowing out candles in the candelabras one at a time.
She climbs onto the table and she crawls over to him and puts her legs over his shoulders.
Sort of gynecological exam style.
And starts sucking on the fruit again.
And sort of rocking back and forth towards him. I'm not really sure what's going on, and I really don't want to know.
Then she crawls under the table, and we hear the sound of Larry's zipper.
So we do know what's going on in this scene.
Larry is starting to relax, but then he sees a knight standing in the doorway.
A knight in shining armor. Well, just the armor anyways. And the knight starts to enter the room. This makes Larry jump up. I guess he does not get bitten at this point.
He runs to the corner, leaving a confused Susan on the floor.
She's asking what happened. Why did he get up? And in a nutshell, he said, ghost.
And Susan's like, what?
She says, no, you didn't see him, because if you did see him, you would have died. And Larry confesses that he talked to André about how to seduce her.
Yeah, he says that André was helping him out.
Obviously not. He seems to have zero interest in Susan, so I just don't know what this whole thing is about. Now André is on his way into the castle, muttering the whole way. When he gets to the entranceway, he almost gets beheaded by that same knight, but he runs away.
He tries to get away, but he finds himself at sword point anyway, and he can't see who's at the other end of the sword, but he's being directed into a cell where he's locked up.
Right, but it's not a ghost. It's Larry, acting on Susan's orders. André is furious. He wants Larry to call Susan down, but Larry has to tell him first that his advice almost worked with Susan until a ghost showed up, and this means something to André for some reason. Then Larry takes off, leaving André alone. And there's a quick scene of Rolf being driven in his car, presumably towards where Larry and Susan are, because he's watching something on a screen in his car.
So now Susan is taking a bath while Larry is riding an exercise bike. He gets it up to 60 kilometers per hour, which is awesome.
Susan's not too interested in that, though. She asks him to come into the bathroom where she is. She wants him to see her in the tub. And he does come in, but it's while juggling.
They talk a little bit about locking André in the dungeon, and Larry says that he was uncomfortable with doing that until Susan told him that André was into that kind of thing.
Well, that's not his thing. We know what his thing is. Then Susan has a task for Larry. She wants him to take a letter to Switzerland. Larry's like, well, how am I supposed to do that? And she says, in my car, dummy.
Yep, he can take the Maserati, which is, again, very exciting for him.
Yes, mentally, he's a 12-year-old, and he's super excited to get to drive the fancy sports car.
He starts running around the room going, vroom, vroom.
This is embarrassing.
He stops vrooming long enough to ask Susan if they had ever taken a bath together in there. He doesn't say who they are, but probably her and Hermann.
Or André, maybe.
She says no. And Larry says, I would if I could. And she says, you would with me? He said, yeah, would you? And she said, yes. And he says, vroom, vroom.
Oh, goodness.
So now Larry is in his Maserati and on his way to Switzerland.
Rolf is also being driven in the opposite direction with a lot more purpose. And then we see Larry driving very carelessly on these narrow roads with snow.
He's jamming tunes and singing along.
And brushing his teeth, putting his gum on the other end of the toothbrush. And once he finishes, he puts the gum back in his mouth. Very disgusting. He's not paying attention to what he's doing.
Now we see that Rolf's car is pulled over and that the driver is watching him from the snow-covered hillside.
Henkel. Henkel, the driver.
With one shot, he shoots Larry through the windshield, and the Maserati crashes into a snowbank. And moments later, the car explodes for absolutely no reason.
The explosion is nothing more than some kind of fireball superimposed over Larry's face. So that's it for Larry.
So André is still in his cell, and the knight in shining armor comes in. André assumes it's Larry, but it's not.
It also has a sword this time, which it jams through the bars of the cell, attempting to skewer André. André cowers at the back of the cell, and the knight can't quite reach him there with the sword. So he starts hacking away at the padlock. Rolf is watching all this via his camera, by the way. They're back on the road. This cell is also a wine cellar of sorts, so André starts hurling bottles at the knight in an effort to drive him back. But the knight gets the lock off anyways, and it looks like André is done for. Eventually, Susan saunters in with a rifle. She aims it. It looks like she could hit the knight, André, or both.
She fires, and the knight goes down. Susan bends down and takes his helmet off, and we recognize him as the crooked-nosed man from the inn.
Rolf sees this from his vehicle and gasps.
"I told you not to meddle in my affairs," said Susan.
She also calls him a dumbass. And he dies. At this, Rolf tells Henkel to stop the car and to run up to the castle and get rid of him.
Then Susan notices the camera and puts two and two together and realizes what's happening. So she addresses the camera, and she realizes that Rolf had only given her the illusion of freedom, and he's been watching and tracking her every move.
She thought they had a marriage of the minds, but obviously they didn't. So she starts to undress for him via the camera.
Andre's beginning to feel a little uncomfortable, so he wants to leave, but Susan tells him to stay because the only place he's going to be safe is around her.
Yeah, it doesn't look too safe around her because she's humping some stuffed animal that's large enough to sit on, all for Rolf's benefit. Susan tells Rolf that she just sent a letter to Switzerland exonerating André, saying that she's the one that ordered the sale of the shares, and that she gave up the only man she ever loved for him, and this is how he repays her.
She then tells André to take off his clothes, and then she tells the camera that this is the only thing worth watching, but this one's just for her. And she breaks the camera. But André runs out of the room anyway.
He's such a coward. Henkel has gotten to the castle by now and padlocks the doors so that André and Susan cannot get out.
Susan chases after André, trying to convince him to stay, and says that he's a dead man if he leaves. And does that turn him on? Of course it does.
Well, he says, no, yes. That was the only laugh in this whole movie. I mean, intentional.
Susan tells them that they're both going to die, but he's still determined to escape.
He's trying to climb over a balcony wall. Susan says he's going to break his back if he goes down there. He might as well take his chance with her in the castle. Henkel is there listening to all this. Unfortunately, his listening spot is inside the big cannon.
Susan sets off the cannon, and Henkel goes flying.
We don't know why, though.
Yeah, we don't know why. It just happened. But it does have the effect of turning André on.
It is pretty funny, too, to watch this man getting shot out of a cannon off the side of a castle, which is set into a mountainside. So there's a big, big drop there. So yes, this has turned on André very much. And he immediately jumps on Susan on this balcony. As a reminder, it's winter. It's very cold. And all she has on is a mink coat and some silky underwear. So they're making out on the floor of the balcony. And Henkel's scarf floats down on top of them.
We see that Rolf has been drinking, and he's climbing toward the castle, and he stumbles and falls.
Inside the castle, André and Susan are confessing via voiceover their suspicions of each other. She wanted to kill him. He suspected her of causing all this. She calls herself an Iron Maiden and still believes that Hermann is coming to kill them. To which André says that he believes he's falling in love with her.
This whole voiceover goes as we're tracking through the room, and we see the doors are barricaded and clothes are strung about. And we eventually get to the bed where they're both lying asleep.
I thought they were on the floor, like on a bearskin rug or something, but
maybe.
Whatever. It's the same thing.
But they're both lying asleep.
As for Hermann, however, he's standing outside. Somehow, as the night progressed, he froze to death standing there.
And that's the end.
That is literally the end.
Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we're discussing Crime and Passion, from 1976.
This is an odd little movie that we couldn't find out a whole lot about. However, I did discover an entry for it at the American Film Institute website. The film rights from the book, An Ace Up My Sleeve, were acquired in 1970, but it took years to make this movie as production finished in May of 1975. There were various working titles used for the movie. In box office in 1975, the film was referred to as Lies. In April in 1975, The Hollywood Reporter said the title was changed to An Ace Up My Sleeve, which was the title of the book. In April 1975, a Hollywood Reporter brief announced that the title had been changed from An Ace Up My Sleeve, which was the name of the book, to Strange Behavior. But Daily Variety reported on June of 1975 that the picture was still known as An Ace Up My Sleeve, but that the title was going to be changed to 3 to Get Ready. And then somehow it all ended up as Crime and Passion.
On November 3rd, 1970, Hollywood Reporter news item announced that producer Ralph Nelson had acquired the film rights to the novel An Ace Up My Sleeve, and production was scheduled for spring of 1971 with him as director. However, on March 11th, 1975, Daily Variety news item speculated that Nelson would have to delay the project as he had been hired to produce a sequel to his 1971 film Flight of the Doves. Nelson is not credited on screen for producing Crime and Passion.
According to production notes in the AMPAS library files, the script was written by Jesse Lasky Jr. and his wife Pat Silver, as well as William Reichert and Ivan Passer. The screenwriters reportedly based the script on a previous screenplay by Alan Trustman and David M. Wolfe. However, Lasky and Silver are the only ones credited on screen. Then, 2 weeks prior to when principal photography was set to begin, the producer, director, and screenwriter were removed from the project, according to a Daily Variety article in May of 1975. That left the new producer, Robert Abrams, to find replacements before the start date. Principal photography was completed by May 20th, 1975.
According to a February 17, 1975 Los Angeles Herald Examiner news item, actor Christopher Plummer was replaced by Omar Sharif in playing the role of André. And the end credits include a statement that the film was shot entirely on location in Austria.
And this movie has other titles. In French, it's Le Désir et la Corruption. In Greek, it's something I can't pronounce. But in Germany, it's known as Frankenstein's Spukschloss, after the castle where part of the movie is set. And to me, that's such a more interesting, not title, but just imagine if the movie had played up the Frankenstein aspect of the castle. So it's just trading on the Frankenstein name without giving us anything in return.
As mentioned earlier, the US release has a different score than the film had overseas. The original music for the film was composed by Vangelis.
The Academy Award-winning Vangelis?
That Vangelis, yes. But his score can only be heard in the European release of the film. The music for the AIP US release of Crime and Passion was composed by Kendall Schmidt.
If you're interested in the Vangelis music for Ace Up My Sleeve, there's a soundtrack released. I found it on YouTube. And art director Jan Brichte designed the credit sequence that was seen in the AIP cut of the film. The tagline for this movie was, "He cheated with money and with love, but now he was gambling with his life."
Crime and Passion was shown at the Telluride Film Festival in August of 1975 and premiered in New York on April 21st, 1976.
Thus the 1976 date for the movie, though it really was released everywhere else in 75.
Director Ivan Passer is generally respected for his films. He's known most for films like Cutter's Way and Creator, but reception of Crime and Passion was not good.
Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 2 stars out of 4, but he called it not only one of the silliest films ever made, but one of the most inexplicable.
Vincent Canby of the New York Times called it a grossly disoriented and disorienting shaggy dog of a movie that seems to have no point and no point of view, whatever. What it's meant to be, I cannot tell. A comedy, melodrama, spoof?
Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune gave the film 1.5 stars out of 4 and called it a European quickie production with an absurd script.
And Arthur D. Murphy of Variety called it a vulgar little embarrassment made up of the untidy combination of self-conscious comedy relief, serious melodrama, and indecisive planning that used to be called camp a few years ago, intercut with sequences of embarrassing non-eroticism made even worse by sophomoric treatment.
That's fair.
So, Cheryl, I Don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anyone, but why don't you share with us your thoughts on Crime and Passion using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic.
I will do that, Jeff. But first, I just want to say that the first time we were watching this movie together, no less than 3 times I begged you to let us switch to a different movie than this one. I had no idea how I was going to describe all the revolting sex scenes that almost always involved eating. I just really was uncomfortable by it, confused by it, and just appalled in general. But on the second watch, I guess I had already been broken in, so it wasn't so hard going down. So here is what I think. My main problem with the movie is the acting. It's not good. Omar Sharif is a respected actor. He's Dr. Zhivago. He's been in great movies. Karen Black, she's fine. I love that Tales of Terror with her fighting off the killer Zuni doll. That's amazing. So they're respectable actors who deserved better than this, I'm sure. But then again, they did sign a contract. But the one who really baffles me is Joseph Bottoms. I don't understand his character at all. He's supposed to be the sexy ski instructor that Susan's having an affair with, but he really comes off as a kindergartner in a grown man's body. He has no interest in sex. He has no interest in anything but shiny objects. It's maddening. The movie is silly. It's technically a crime caper of sorts and a romance, but none of that ever really gets resolved. The romance, we know it's not going to last. These are 2 terrible people. They do deserve each other, but they'll also be looking elsewhere as soon as it's possible. It's inconsequential. This movie says nothing and means nothing, and it's boring. The ending is ridiculous. A man freezing to death in the snow, another man getting shot out of a cannon. I mean, that's a farce, and this movie doesn't play it like a farce. There's no character development in it, obviously. These are 2 shady business people who are scamming a rich but murderous man out of his money. And at the end, the rich but murderous man has been scammed out of his money, and they're 2 shady people. There's no one to root for. Every character is unlikable, but the kindest character, that being Larry, and the most villainous character, both met with horrible deaths, but only one of them really deserved it. I think we've already mentioned that the sex scenes are just nauseating. And then Karen Black's voice, she's narrating at the end. And she sounds like a little girl. But then other times she's scolding and she sounds like a school marm. She's just grating every time she talks. There's no Frankenstein. Frankenstein is mentioned in the movie. It's the title of the German release, Frankenstein's Spuckschloss. I would have killed to see Frankenstein lumber into a scene in this movie. And for a positive, I thought, and I just remembered that the scene after the wedding, when they're all in coaches driving up to the castle, well, that was really nice. It was really well shot. It was snowy. There were festooned carriages. Rolf didn't look too happy, but everyone else seemed to be having a good time. It was like I said, like a Hallmark movie. And other than that, I got nothing. I didn't like this movie. It's a P. It's pathetic. I don't know how much money was spent on it. I don't know how much money it made, but it wasn't worth anybody's time. It wasn't worth anybody's money. It's an awful, awful movie. Don't watch it. If you can find it, don't. All right, Jeff, what do you think?
I have to agree with a lot of what you said. I did not find Karen Black's voice as annoying as you did, but I did find Omar Sharif's voice annoying. His voice is like an octave higher than you'd expect it to be, so it sounds like he's speeded up. He sounds like Simon of the Chipmunks. And so every time he speaks, that throws me a little bit. I never did get used to it.
He's very whiny, too. Everything he says is apology and excuse of trying to get something out of somebody.
Yeah, but that he gets turned on by all of that, so you kind of expect it from him.
Ugh.
So yeah, this movie was weird, and I wasn't looking forward to watching it, but I was looking forward to having seen it so that we could check this one off the list. Because one thing we're trying to do with the American International Podcast is be thorough and check out everything, and they're not all going to be winners, and this certainly is not one of them. The most amusing character is Larry, and that's because he's just so bizarre. To see him running around the castle like a child, excited to look for a ghost, and getting to drive the Maserati being a highlight of his life, and running around the castle again, going vroom, vroom. were really the only remotely enjoyable parts of this film. And the least enjoyable is probably watching Karen Black eat and eat and eat.
Ugh.
I too wouldn't have minded seeing Frankenstein lumber into a scene here and there. And I'm not sure what the point of this movie is. I love a good caper movie. This is not a good caper movie. It almost seems like the caper was accidental. And it's hardly seems a driving point for a story, but here we are. And this is the story that somebody tried to tell. And it was a terrible idea. I'm going to say the locations are nice to look at.
The Alps sure look pretty. I don't ski, but man, the snow looked nice.
Yeah, I'll probably never go there. And I'd rather watch the snow on television or a movie theater than see it in person. But that's about the only positives I could say about this movie. This movie is very much a pathetic pee.
Well, we agree for once.
So I believe that will be it for this episode of the American International Podcast. Until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.